We are the children of the migrant worker. We are the offspring of the concentration camp. Sons and daughters of the railroad builder who leave their stamp on America. We are the children of the Chinese waiter, born and raised in the laundry rooms. We are the offspring of the Japanese gardener who leave their stamp on America. Sing a song for ourselves. What have we got to lose? Sing a song for ourselves. We got the right to choose. We got the right to choose. We got the right to choose. Foster children of the Pepsi generation, cowboys and Indians ride, a red man ride. Hey, watching war movies with the next door neighbor, secretly rooting for the other side. Sing a song for ourselves. What have we got to lose? Sing a song for ourselves. We got the right to choose. We got the right to choose. We got the right to choose.
Good afternoon. Welcome to the History of the Asian Community Center. This is the third episode, and we have some exciting stories to tell you about the history of the Asian Community Services, also known as ACS. With me are the panels of the original organizers, activists with ACS. One individual that you will see as part of that group is Lilly Yee Shiroi, and we will see her on the video. I would like to now introduce our panel. To my right is June Otow, who was kind enough to join us from state of Washington. Welcome, June.
Thank you.
And to my left, these gentlemen, activists, still activists, Raymond Lee,
Thank you.
Hero Fong and Randy Shiroi. Randy is back from his panel being on the Japanese Community Center. Welcome.
Thank you.
So the 60s and the 70s were a very significant time, I would say, for all of us. And maybe, Raymond, you could start off by talking a little bit about the context in which we started our work in Sacramento.
Sure, June. Change defined the 60s. Both RFK and MLK had been assassinated. The South raged with Selma and Birmingham, while Mexican workers in California were systematically exploited. In this country and around the world, the old order was being questioned. This situation was replicated in the Asian community. We defined ourselves as Asian Americans. We were no longer Japanese, Filipino, Korean, Chinese, and most especially, we are not Oriental. Some of the leaders and people who influenced the movement were Yuri Kochiyama, Grace Lee Boggs, Larry Itlong, and the Filipino farm workers. Yuri Kochiyama fought for redress, prison rights, and free speech movement. She was best known for her association with Malcolm X. Grace Lee Boggs was a philosopher, activist, and labor organizer with her husband, Grace Lee Boggs, in Detroit, working with the auto workers. And Larry Itlong. Before there was Cesar and UFW, there was Larry Itlong and the Filipino farm workers. Among the organizations were Asian American Political Alliance, UCD and UCLA Asian American Studies, IWK, Red Guard Party, Everybody's Bookstore. No movement succeeds unless it has the support of the people, who have been and continue to be the motive force in gaining political power. In this struggle, which was in part generational, the youth were the vanguard, the leaders in the movement. The Asian struggle consisted of three actual struggles: the Third World Strike, the I Hotel struggle, and the struggle to save Little Tokyo. What we accomplished: we created art and culture specific to and for Asian Americans. We laid the groundwork for many of the Asian organizations today. And finally, we fought to make sure that Asian American studies would be part of the normal educational process. Asian American studies in classes throughout the country are taught today as part of the normal educational process.
Raymond, you're so right that many leaders emerged during that time. The theme was power to the people, remember? I mean, and I think we need to recognize that thousands of Asians, low income, middle income, young, old, first generation, third generation, fourth generation, all became involved in the movement at that time. Whether they went on strike or picketed or volunteered at a community program, they are the unsung leaders of the movement. They help to bring the community together, to strengthen it, to solidify it, and to make it a better place, I think, for Asians.
Thank you, Jim.
At the time, the South Side neighborhood was primarily Asian. So as you recall, Chinese immigrants and Asian elderly, and low income. And Randy, I know that you saw Sacramento, the Sacramento Asian community as somewhat unique. You want to talk about that a little bit?
Well, real briefly, the Sacramento Asian community, when you look at it, we're really talking about the Chinese and Japanese communities. They were really adjacent to each other, or they were actually located in the same area. Whereas if you looked at San Francisco or Los Angeles, the Japantown and Chinatowns were physically separated. So you have a situation where people grew up together, lived in the same neighborhood, got to know each other, especially for the American-born generation, went to school together and got to know each other and began to see that we had some common interest and similarities in our histories in this country.
So most of us were students at the time, right? I think all of us were students at the time. Except Hotch, that's right. You were already working at the welfare department. So Harold, how did academia versus community work play out from the campuses?
Thanks, June. Before I do that, I wanted to add to Randy's comment on
Sure.
the Asian American community in Sacramento. You know, like racism was as common as apple pie against the Asian American community at that time. And as you can see from this picture, this is the Asian version of blackface. There were elected officials, assemblymen, the sheriff who was elected, city council member, made up as Asian Americans. You know, and you can't get any better than to take a look at that picture, and that's what we were facing at the time. Also, the Chinese Americans and the Japanese American communities were taking care of their own with the Chinese family associations and the Japanese district associations called the Fuchinkais. We were not being served by the city, the county, or state departments, or even by the private sector in Sacramento. So that was the situation of where we were at in the late 60s and early 70s. Back to your question about academia and community work, you know, most of us got started on the college campuses with Asian American studies. We learned our history and we reshaped our identity as Asian Americans. You know, we took classes in Black studies, Chicano studies, women's studies, and we found common ground with our struggles for freedom and justice. But this was not enough for some of us. We wanted to take the knowledge of the Asian American studies to the community. So this is where that question about, you know, taking the knowledge and adding the Asian American studies and bringing it back to the community. We were young and idealistic at that time, and we really thought that going back into the community, that we can really change the world.
Now that we have looked at the times in which ACS came about, let's talk about how Asian Community Services started. Harold, could you recall your involvement with ACS?
Well, my earliest memory, you know, really was about what Raymond talked about at the beginning, setting that stage of, you know, there was change going on rapidly with the anti-war movement, civil rights, Asian Americans looking for their identity. And I had just transferred to Sac State from City College, where I co-taught the first Asian American Studies class with Professor Richard Matsumoto. At Sac State's Asian American Studies, that's where I met Raymond Lee, who really became my comrade in arms throughout the 50 years. But part of the group at Sac State, they also wanted to go back and take that knowledge to the community. And that opportunity came about when we found that a group of students from UC Davis, you know, wanted to do some research on the Sacramento Asian American community. And that's where I met June Otow and a group of students from UC Davis and Professor Isao Fujimoto. But it also caused this debate about outsiders coming into our community and doing work. So there was this debate about outsiders and insiders and the local people. But it sort of settled itself when a lot of the UC Davis people went back to the campus. And during that time, I also ran into Randy Shiroi, his late brother Earl Troy, and Lilly Yee, and Yasumura. And you know, trying to say what ACS was all about, what was our philosophy, our purpose, and I thought about this, and I thought maybe the best way to try to phrase it is to use Abraham Lincoln's famous words, that government of the people, by the people, and for the people. So ACS was an organization that was of the people, by the people, and for the people. And what I meant by that is that we organized in the community, we learned from the people what the problems were. We got them involved in solving those problems, and we showed them that we could fight the system and get what we want. And then we allowed them to take ownership of those activities and groups. So for me, ACS was really a life-changing experience. You know, it introduced me to community organizing and the words, power to the people, but not just words, but real life experiences in learning how to organize regular people to have power, to solve their own problems, and to fight for justice. And what I learned there and later became my kind of North Star that centered what my life's work was all about.
Thanks, Harold. You know, I was just thinking about Earl Shiroi. You all remember Earl
Yeah,
Shiroi?
oh, yeah.
Because Earl played a really key part in getting us together, I think, and getting us moving and keeping us moving. You know, I think we all learned a lot from Earl. He was older than us, and he had real organizing experience. And so, to me, he was kind of a master of strategy. And you'll remember that there were times when we were fighting an issue, and we'd say, "Oh no, you know, what's going to happen next?" And we'd go to Earl, and Earl would always come up with a next step. You know, like, "Well, you guys, you can do this, and that way we can win." Oh, we were so young. But I remember him telling us that we need to define our own victories. And so, you know, like, victory wasn't raising gobs of money from the United Crusade. Victory was every Asian American or Asian that said no to United Way and gave their money to us instead, you know? So anyway, I met Earl at Yellow House at a time when I just gotten out of school, and I wanted to learn more about community organizing. So for me, I just really learned a lot from him. But let's talk about Yellow House.
Yes, Yellow House was the key in starting up ACS. I believe it was the first Asian American study field house that developed into Asian Community Services. And Yellow House was used tutoring program for the Chinese immigrant kids from William Land School. And we will hear a video clip from Lily's interview about her experience at the Yellow House, which is located on Parkview Presbyterian Church property. Good morning. We are here on the grounds of Parkview Presbyterian Church, and I'm here with Lilly Yee Shiroi, who was one of the first participants, the original participants of ACS.
Well, what I remember is that I first got involved because I was a student at UC Davis, and the Asian American Studies was offering a class, a community service project class, where we could come in and we were assigned to work with the William Land School students who might need help with English. At the time, the school was like over 50% Chinese, and there were no Chinese-speaking staff, and the only Chinese person was the school secretary. So I signed up for the class, my roommate signed up for the class, and so there were only 2 of us who came into Sacramento.
Wow.
And we went to William Land School. We met 2 young students. I still remember their name. It was Pak Lim and Sam Tam, and we started with them in the school cafeteria. But not long after that, it was the spring of 1970, Parkview approved our use of this building for our tutorial.
Oh, great.
So we walked the couple students over to this house, and it was yellow. And so they said, "Oh, it's the Yellow House." And before long, it was their brothers and sisters and friends that were coming to the Yellow House, and the name stuck.
Ah, terrific. Now, who was the instructor of Asian American Studies at the time at UC Davis?
I'm pretty sure at the time it was Isao Fujimoto.
Oh, Professor Fujimoto, okay. Yeah, he was very much involved with the community. In his later years, he was involved with the farming community. So what type of activities did you have here at the Yellow House?
At the time we started that initial quarter, it was basically assisting them with homework assignment. It was an after-school homework support kind of project. But in the summer that year, we had a lot of volunteers that came from the Sac State University, and one of the students, his name was Gary Matsumoto,
yes.
Took a lead role in organizing the first Yellow House recreation program that summer. And so we had quite a few students come, quite a few volunteer students come to help on the program, and a lot of kids in the neighborhood came here. So after that summer, it was well established. Yellow House was the place to come for
Wow.
those kids.
Did you use the Southside Park for some of the activities also?
Well, Southside was very conveniently located across the street. So during the summer recreation, there were team sports that were organized, and yeah.
Yes, so, you know, Parkview was very much involved with the Yellow House, or back in those days, we used to call it the Corner House. And the Yellow House term really picked up with Parkview people. Some of the people from Parkview that were involved with the Yellow House were Chris and Torch Kurotomi. Our session members like Carney Owe and George Matsuoka from our church were very supportive of the activities, what was happening at the Yellow House, especially supportive of the immigrant community. And you recall any more people that were involved?
Well, I know that there was a lot of students that came from Sac State, and they were supervised by student volunteers. And I remember John Ng being a supervisor, and I think at one point Harold Fong was also a supervisor of the tutorial from Sac State. And I'm not sure that we actually had supervisorial leadership when we were coming from Davis, but Davis Asian American Studies supported the Yellow House for probably a number of years. I remember that we always got a car from the university garage so we could drive tutors into Sacramento to work with the Yellow House. Wow.
We are now on the corner of 8th and T, outside of front of the Yellow House. Oh, the address is still up there, 729 T
729.
Street. So this is front of the church, and the ground. We're still on the grounds of Parkview Presbyterian Church, and a lot of changes have been made since Lilly was involved with the tutorial program.
Yeah, and the trees, wow, they really
You know,
cover
if
the
the
whole
trees,
house.
if the trees could talk, they have a lot of history to talk about.
Thank you, Lily. That was an interesting and exciting walk through memory lane about the Yellow House. And I just want to give a little bit of flavor of, you know, what some of the tutors went through. So I'm going to read from a journal from Patrice Fong, no relationship to me, but she was one of the tutors. And I'll go with this. On February the 24th, Dana and I arrived early. When May and her friends saw us, they came running to us. May took my hand, and May was Patrice's tutie who came from China about 3 years ago. May took my hand and hugged me, and I hugged her. She took delight in telling her friends that I was her tutor. On March the 1st, I felt really good today, because when May saw me, she ran across the street to greet me. After reviewing her homework, I told her how proud I was of her. And after driving home, I gave her my phone number, and I told her that she can call me at any time. On March the 10th, May, the tutie, brought me chocolate bunnies and marshmallow bunnies to eat. I brought her yarn and knitting needles, and I showed her the basic knitting, and she caught on rather quickly in about 15 minutes. On March the 15th, Patrice wrote, May brought her knitting back. She had been knitting all weekend, and I was so proud of her doing it all by herself. May wanted to walk home after the tutorial, and I felt really close to May walking home. We were swirling our arms and around and just walking goofily. She was really opening up to me. And as we were walking, she pointed out several houses. Hippies live over here. Japanese over there. But then also when we walked past other houses, she would say, bad people here. And she was swearing at the houses as we passed. That after saying goodbye and, saying, I'll see you next week, I said to myself, oh my God, today was the first time I heard her swear. And I think we're going to be friends, and I'm looking forward to enjoying to tutor her. Well, this is kind of an example and a taste of the value of the tutorial program that ACS started, connecting children to caring adults and making a difference in the lives of these children and also in the lives of the tutors who tutor the kids. I also tutored at William Land Elementary School, but not part of this, but as part of another project. And the tutoring also showed me that there was something other than what your parents wanted you to be. My parents, like a lot of Asian parents, they wanted their kids to be doctors and lawyers and dentists, optometrists. I found that I could be something different. I could be a teacher, a social worker, which is what I saw there. So, that's my experience as a tutor in that, at William Land.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, great. That was a great experience for a lot of people, I think. Now, once ACS got started, the big challenge was to raise awareness in the Asian community. And there were two major issues that we used to raise awareness: the Fantasia miniature golf course and our crusade against the United Way. Let's talk about Fantasia first. Raymond, do you remember picketing the golf course and kind of what led up to picketing?
I have a faint memory.
You have a faint memory?
Fantasia was a mini golf course in Sacramento that used stereotypical and racist characters of Asians as their theme. ACS and local students in high schools formed together a coalition to bring the signs down. This was one of the first political actions by ACS, the first one being United Crusade. And this action, in part, was chosen because the racism was visual and raw, with no ambiguity. The solution was to take action and send a message that Asians will not be screwed. Additionally, Asians hope to bring Asians together and lay the foundation for further struggles later on.
Good, thank you.
Thank you.
The other major way we raised awareness was through our campaign against the United Way. And Harold, why don't you give us some background on the United Way campaign? Or the anti-United Way campaign, I should say.
Really. Yeah, it was more like that. It was actually more like that. The survey of the United Way members, submitted for a $5,000 proposal for the interpreter and referral services. We picketed their kickoff luncheon 3 years in a row. We leafleted state workers, and we gave to our community instead.
Raised hell.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember we had that comic book that Lilly created about the United Way, and we got up really early in the morning and went out and leafleted the state workers, right?
You're right. I think we may have gone out a little bit out of order here, but I was going to say that in addition to this, during that survey, 3 out of the 55 United Crusade funded agencies had Chinese-speaking and Japanese-speaking staff. They raised $2.5 million, and 0 of that went to the Asian American community. Even though they did their own study on the needs of the Asian American community, and there was an urgent need for services, they still did not fund us. And this is even after Asian Americans that work in state offices, county and city offices, donated to the United Way. So in a sense, we were not afraid to take on the power elite in the community. The board of the United Way was made up of really the who's who in Sacramento. And then we picketed their opening drive, and where the elected officials were present, the power elite were gathered there. We leafleted state buildings, and we asked people to give directly to us. There was also this one instance I remember where we tried to record the meeting, of our meeting with the United Way leaders, just to show our community what we're up against. But they didn't go through with the meeting. They stopped it, and we had to walk out. But it was really our belief that the larger community had a responsibility to provide services to the Asian American community in terms of the services and bilingual staff.
To add further to your comments about the United Crusade, people who are familiar with United Way now, it's no longer the same as it was 50 years ago. 50 years ago, it was a big thing for companies, for public agencies to have 100% participation from their employees in donating to the United Crusade. The United Crusade made a big deal out of it. They publicized, which agencies, had 100% contribution from their employees. So you have a situation where supervisors are going to the employees, and saying, "Oh, donate to United Crusade." So people were getting pressured to donate, and we were looking at Asian employees being pressured to donate, and we wanted people to say, "Hey, if you're not going to contribute anything back into the Asian community, we're not going to give, and we're instead going to give to Asian Community Services." We wanted to provide that alternative.
Exactly. Exactly.
So as the community began to realize the need for the services, ACS began to address those needs.
Yes, and Hotch, I believe you were one of the people involved in a number of efforts to make services more accessible to non-English speaking Asians. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about that.
Yes, I was a social worker at the Sacramento County Welfare Department, and one of the things that I heard about from ACS was that there was a local branch office of the California State Department of Employment Services, Employment Development. And we had back then a lot of canneries in the area. And a lot of the ladies of the Chinese ancestry who were not really English speaking needed help to apply for unemployment benefits. And there was a lady in the lobby that was hiring herself to be an interpreter for the ladies.
I remember that.
And we felt that EDD was responsible in hiring a staff who was bilingual. Also, our department, the welfare department, and reflections of what ACS did, we pooled our Asian staff, Chicano staff, and other minorities to provide on a volunteer basis to help with the language with our department. And one of the significant things that came out of ACS was Earl Shiroi's experience in working with Southside neighborhood. Because with our department, we had representatives from our department being a liaison with geographical neighborhoods in Sacramento County. Earl Shiroi took upon Southside neighborhood, and I think that's how he got involved with ACS. Through ACS, addressing the Board of Supervisors to direct the Department of Welfare Department to assign a position as an Asian liaison position. So when the budget cut took place for the representative of geographical neighborhoods, Earl continued to be the Asian liaison with Southside neighborhood and began to be involved with ACS from the Welfare Department, as well as some members of our Asian caucus with the Welfare Department. And I recall also that we got a call from UC Davis Medical Center asking for bilingual services. And they had heard about ACS providing those type of services. So bilingual services came about with grassroots organizations throughout the state. In Los Angeles, San Diego, San Francisco, here in Sacramento. And I had networked with some of the Latino folks in our community to begin to advocate the bilingual and bicultural needs of the state of California. And out of that came from Diamond Lee Aleatory Bilingual Services Act, and back in 1973.
Wow. Interesting.
Ended up with the most efficient way to provide interpreters and would be to have staff who were bilingual. So the welfare department has a special process for hiring. Once you meet the regular qualifications for hiring as, say, an eligibility worker, if you have language skills, then there's a further test you would take to be what's called selectively certified bilingual Chinese, bilingual Vietnamese, and those staff would be assigned to work with clients who don't speak English or are limited English proficient.
Right.
So that's the most efficient way to provide that kind of service.
That was a good affirmative action program there,
Yeah,
Right.
it made a big difference in Sacramento,
did.
I think.
It sure did.
Yeah. Well, shall we move on to working with the elderly? Because along with those services, the INR services, we were doing a lot with the Asian elderly at that time. And I remember we raised like $365 at a car wash, and we thought that was a really big deal.
$1 a car.
$1 a car, that's right. But we didn't wash 365 cars. We sold tickets in advance, and a lot of those people didn't bring their cars. So,
Yeah, that was good.
but we were really excited that we raised that money, and we could take our first trip, field trip for the elderly. I also remember that we took the Issei's to Okay's grave, and I think we went to Angel Island and Lake Tahoe, and several times to San Francisco, as I recall. And Randy, do you remember that field trip where we first took the Chinese and the Japanese on the same bus? Do you remember that?
Yeah, it was kind of interesting because people were like, oh.
Yeah, they were shocked, right?
You're Chinese. Oh. So it was interesting. People were trying to communicate with hand signals. Some other people were using, because the Japanese writing system uses Chinese characters as well, they were writing Chinese characters and passing them back and confirming it has the same meaning. So people got along. It was actually really surprising the efforts they made to kind of communicate with each other.
Yeah.
East meets west.
It was
East
really,
meets east.
yeah, it was really amazing.
But it was also something that ACS was trying to do to bring the two communities together under
Closer.
one organization, as opposed to having the Chinese family associations and then the Japanese district associations, and each one of them served their own. We actually were trying to create one that would serve both.
Right, and younger people, we didn't have a problem with it, but we knew that it would be a challenge with the older people.
Yeah.
Exactly. So, but I think the most important field trip was a local one to the Senior Citizen Center downtown. And it was the first time that the elderly realized that their taxes went to pay for senior classes and activities, but no Asians were participating. And so we organized around that. And Randy, maybe you can explain a little bit more about that.
Yeah, at that time we had already had a couple of classes established at the ACS building. We had the Issei knitting class, and those were some of the people that went to on this little field trip and said, gee, this is a nice facility. how come we can't have some classes like this?
Yeah.
And but all the staff at the Senior Citizen Center spoke English. Nobody spoke Japanese. Nobody spoke Chinese. So they wouldn't fit in there. So this is where the idea comes of, let's go to the city, since they're providing these kinds of services, and request funds to support our recreation programs for seniors. And out of that, we, submitted a proposal to the city council, and we're organized the seniors to go to the council itself and make a presentation on what they were requesting. So they basically wanted to, have the pay for their instructors, some supplies. It was a very modest request. It was just a little over $6,000, I think, is what we ended up with. But that really opened their eyes that, hey, these services are being provided through taxpayer dollars. But,
Yeah, but not for us.
But not for us. We can't use them.
We get
Exactly.
ripped.
Yep.
And so we're going to see a clip of Lilly Yee's interview about her recollections about the startup of all the classes and things. Right?
Okay, we are now at the old Asian Community Services office. Could you tell me your involvement as one of the coordinators with ACS?
After I graduated in '71,
Okay.
I volunteered to be one of the coordinators at ACS. And at the time, ACS was kind of in its infancy, starting an interpreter referral service.
Oh, okay.
And we had like a small staff, and we got staffing through work-study program at Sac State and at City College. So we had Miyako Didion, who was bilingual Japanese.
Oh, yeah, I remember her. Yeah.
And then we had, I think his name was Mr. Leong. And he was the bilingual Chinese interpreter. He came from Sac City. And we also had a secretary, Lois Wong, who was also from Sac City. So that was our staffing at the time. In, I think about '72, the Issei's were very interested, had already gone on several field trips and had visited senior centers, and they became very interested in having their own program. So, of course, we thought it was a great opportunity to approach the city to ask them to help sponsor a program that would serve and provide probably Asian language instructors. So we went to City Council with a proposal, and the City Council at the time wasn't sure they had enough money, but eventually they thought we could provide some kind of funding and put us on the annual budget. Well, that was great news. So right away we wanted to get our programs together, get teachers certified, and I remember I called my friend Margaret Fujita, who was studying ceramics at the Art Institute in San Francisco. And she, of course, said, well, not of course, because she's a very generous lady, she said she'd be willing to help set up the first ceramics class. So that was the beginning of the program. And as soon as that year, it was maybe the fall of '72, we got funding. And we also secured space at William Land School to do like the ceramics class and arts and crafts class for seniors.
One of the things that you just mentioned that ACS was able to provide services were bilingual services, which was practically unknown in all the social services in Sacramento County. So with that word getting around, more and more people were coming to Asian Community Services because Asian Community Services laid the groundwork for future social services being developed for the Asian community.
Okay.
Now we would like to listen to a small audio interview with
Margaret Fujita.
Margaret Fujita, who was the initial class for ceramics.
Yeah.
So let's listen to her interview.
Good, good. It feels like you were around forever. So, do you remember when you first got involved with Randy and Lilly and those guys?
Lilly was really, and Randy were involved a lot with the Asian community, and they wanted to do something for the first generation of the Japanese women that were still around. And so she knew I did ceramics, and she had asked me if I would do it. And I said, I'm just starting to go to school in San Francisco at an art school, but I do come home on the weekends to help out with the family's restaurant, Fuji's. And I said I could probably do it, on Saturday. And so we used William Land School. We used the foyer into the auditorium. And ACC was good enough to get a kiln for me to fire. And they put it into the nurse's office. And I would fire their pieces over there. And then William Land School was considered a fire hazard and earthquake. It was going to be torn down and rebuilt. And so at that time, this gentleman named Kanji Nishijima. He had a appliance store on 10th Street, and he had a house across the street that was vacant, and so he donated it to ACC until they were able to find something larger. So we were able to go over there with ACC.
When do you...
It was named something.
Yeah, it's ACS, Asian
ACS.
Community Services.
Oh,
yeah,
okay.
Because ACC wasn't around at that time. Yeah.
And then so we were there, and then Mrs. Wakayama was teaching her calligraphy, and wherever I went, she went too. And so later on, we were able to move. I was going back and forth.
Oh, so you did you commute from Sacramento?
Every week, and I had to help at the restaurant.
Oh, gosh, when did you sleep?
I you know what, I look back and I said, I did this?
Yeah, you were young.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. So it was a very functional garage that they turned it into. And then for the gentlemen, the Japanese gentlemen, they would play something like
Go. They play go.
Yeah, these little black pebbles.
Yeah, black and white pebbles.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
And they were upstairs on the second floor.
Do you remember some of the people, the earliest days? Did his mom go?
Nishijima?
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Did Mrs. Moria?
Mrs. Moria.
She went.
Yeah, Mrs. Hori, Mrs. Shimamoto. I mean, there are many. Mrs. Sakamoto. I probably had 25 plus.
But in those days, how did they must have lived around Southside Park or something, how do you think?
Yeah, I mean, all of them lived on V Street.
Did some of them walk to the class?
Oh, for sure. They didn't drive, because I remember seeing them walking under the underpass to go to the church on Sunday.
When you look back on your 50-year-old contact with ACC, what do you think about it?
there were a lot of good people that really worked real hard in helping the Asian community. I mean, it's amazing where they were and what they are doing now. It's amazing that every time somebody says something about ACC, I say, oh my gosh.
It's hard to believe, huh?
Yeah.
Okay. So that was interesting. Margaret was so involved from the very beginning of the ceramics class. But I'd like to take us back to the issue at City Hall, because Mrs. Ito was chosen by the knitting class, I believe, to be the spokesperson when the Issei's went to City Hall to fight for the money to have the ceramics class and all the other classes that they had in mind. And I have a copy of her speech. So I'd like to read it to you because I think it's very enlightening. Good evening, members of the City Council, Mayor, and ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for giving us time to present our views. Today, we, the Issei, came here with ACS members to ask the city to appropriate funds for senior citizens programs. Before the Second World War, the Japanese people lived and had business in a certain part of the city, and we could see each other every day and enjoyed life together. However, when the war broke out, unfortunately, we were forced to leave our houses and property, which we had earned with our hard work, and had to move into relocation camps in tears. After the war, we had to move again to many different places because of the redevelopment program. Now, we are all scattered around and we cannot see or talk to our friends very often. Most of us are leading a very lonely, alienated life. However, last January, several of us got together and started a knitting class. The number of participants in this class became much larger than we expected at the beginning. Now we all look forward to coming to this class, which is held twice a week. Some of the members are so delighted to have a place they could communicate with others in their language that they have expressed their feeling of happiness, saying, "I feel as if I were back in my hometown." These aspects show very clearly that many elderly people were having a very lonely and desperate life. For most of us, old and unable to communicate would have been the same if it had not been for the knitting class. We sincerely hope that with your warm understanding of our situation, you will help us old people who do not have much to live by providing the funds for the Senior Citizens Program at Asian Community Services. So that's the program that started the funding for the senior classes.
Yeah, finally, in August of 1972, the city approved the request for something like $6,700 beyond the field trip, and as a result of the unity created by the victory at the City Hall. The Asian elderly started using our office more and more often, and Mrs. Ito's knitting class was the first. Many of other classes followed. Some of the other classes were calligraphy, craft, doll making, flower arrangement. The Gold Club started meeting at the office. Eventually, some of the classes had to move to William Land School to accommodate more and more people participating in the program. Now I'd like to switch gears and talk about a call that we received from the Welfare Rights Organization about an elderly Chinese man needed help repairing his driveway. So we all pitched in to take care of that. Randy, could you tell us also ACS involvement with the traffic lights?
Yeah, I think the traffic lights, these are lights that got installed at 11th and X and 11th and W Street. And prior to our involvement, those intersections were not did not have any lights. And the Buddhist church had attempted to get lights installed because many of their members, the elderly in particular, had no, motor vehicles, so they walked to the church, which is on Riverside and X. And there were lots of near misses where they were nearly hit by cars. And they had attempted to get the lights installed. We heard about this, and so we contacted the president of the Buddhist church, and we did some research on what the criteria was for getting lights installed, the number of accidents that had occurred at those intersections, and we found that there had been over 30 accidents in 1 year at those two intersections. So we started the process of looking at other organizations that would back the Buddhist church request to get lights installed. So ACS, of course, after we looked at it, we backed their request for traffic lights. Approached Parkview Presbyterian Church, which is also in the Southside neighborhood, and they also got involved and sent letter requesting installation of traffic signals at those two intersections. So that additional pressure from other organizations, I think, was enough to get the city to install lights at those two intersections.
Right.
So it made it much safer for the elderly in particular to cross the street and get to the Buddhist church, or what was then Gemco and is now a Target store that they often shopped at. So again, it's part of our organizing efforts to increase the participation, get a broader support from the community with these particular kinds of issues.
Exactly.
Thank you. Now let's talk about William Land School. In 1973, the school board proposed to close William Land School. I believe we have a short interview clip with Lilly.
Besides providing the service, I think because of the services that like the school and agencies were starting to respond and recognize that there was a great need and that they needed to do more than they had been doing. For example, one thing that happened then, because through Yellow House and us raising that concern that students weren't getting the help they needed in school, finally we got an Asian principal, Gladys Ping, at the William Land School.
Yeah, great.
And that really helped open up the school, because during that year, I guess 1972, there was also a Chinese language school that was organized by Chinese Student Association from Sac State that was operating out of the New Helvetia projects. And it had grown to be like 100 or more students and outgrowing their space. So so they needed to relocate. So working with C.K. Wong and his brother, who also was C.K. Wong, we were able to negotiate with Gladys Ping, the principal, to use classrooms at the school. So they were able to relocate a Chinese school that operated on the weekends at William Land.
So, Randy, could you tell us in terms of what the school board decided about William Land School?
The district was faced with having to rebuild or tear down 13 elementary schools, and because they did not meet new earthquake safety standards, the school district only had enough funds to rebuild 5 schools. So they came up with a couple of different plans proposed. We had a very short time to respond. One of the plans was for what they called an integration plan, which was basically one-way busing from the minority neighborhoods into more affluent, and in this case also white neighborhoods. A second proposal that they had, you could look at it and say all the schools were being built in, again, affluent white neighborhoods. One school would be left for the whole central city of Sacramento. So that Asian kids would have to go walk there, and Hispanic kids from the Washington neighborhood would have to one school for the whole central city. But most of the schools were being rebuilt in affluent white neighborhoods. So you go to Crocker being rebuilt, you go to East Sac and River Park, those schools get rebuilt. It was pretty blatant, example of, certain wealthier, whiter neighborhoods were getting all the schools. And so if you were just regular working class white kid, you would get moved or bused as well. So because we had a relationship with the people in the neighborhood, and the William Land School had been functioning in some ways as a community center as well. We had the Chinese school that was there, as Lilly mentioned in the tape. We had a ceramics class there. There were lots of other activities. We had film showings at William Land. So the community, we were able to organize the parents to go to the school board to demand that William Land be rebuilt, be included as one of those 5 schools. And I think part of our process, we looked at other neighborhoods, and we were able to looked at forming coalitions so that we would have greater political weight with the school board. So we had actually a coalition with the Hispanic parents in the Washington neighborhood and the black parents in the Oak Park neighborhood. We also ended up picking up a parent from the Riverside School, which was scheduled to be torn down and not rebuilt. So in the end, we also tried to work with the parents in East Sacramento to come up with a plan that we could all agree on and take to the board. We were never quite able to work that out with the East Sacramento parents, but we were able to have, I think, the broadest coalition of parents and neighborhoods in coming up with a plan that we could all support. And ultimately, something very close to the plan that we proposed was what happened. So we were able to save William Land and Washington elementary schools and get those rebuilt. Riverside Elementary School was rebuilt, where it had been previously scheduled to be eliminated. And at that time, almost half of the children attending Riverside Elementary School were Asian. They were not recent immigrants, they were the American born. But again, you could see that certain neighborhoods were going to be denied schools and others would get theirs. So I think we were really successful in building a broad kind of coalition with different neighborhoods and different groups to save our schools. And I think it was one of our most successful efforts.
I agree.
Yeah, I think that addressing the Sacramento City School Board was a event that happened in Sacramento. Here again, I want to address the bilingual effort, because the organizing effort were Spanish-speaking families or parents, as well as the Chinese-speaking. So Harold, could you give us some light in terms of how it was organized in terms of addressing the board?
Yeah, okay. First off, I just wanted to say that the school board, in making this decision, it's a really good example of institutional racism when you have these no Asian representation on the board, and then the Caucasians on the board make decisions that benefit them and disadvantage the others. So, that whole thing about Broadway and everything north, they had to go to Land Park schools, and they were going to close all the other schools in the inner city, Washington and William Land. But the organizing effort was done by, we had a relationship with the Chinese school, and the teachers and the headmaster there, they were the people that helped us with the translation,
Right.
talking to the parents, and getting them to come out to school board meetings after school board meetings, and then culminating with a really huge meeting where 200 or 300 people attended, and most of that audience was the Chinese immigrants. And one speaker after another presented the case about why they needed that school. So, and then also at that time, you know, they had the Chinese principal who worked with the community to bring our seniors program over there, the Chinese school over there, the film showing of Chinese and Japanese films, free film showings over there, and then also a after-school recreation programs for kids. So all of these kind of things had, the community had a sense of ownership and belonging to that school and then saving it.
Right.
We also, like Randy said, we formed that coalition of the, what we call the ABC committee, you know, the Asians, Blacks, and Chicanos. And through that, we saved, you know, Washington Neighborhood School, which was the Hispanic community, William Land, and then the American Legion Continuation High School, which served a large portion of the African American community. And yeah.
Because we had been involved in other segments of the Asian community, we garnered support for the rebuilding of William Land from other organizations in the Asian community. So Japanese American Citizens League, Japanese Community Center supported the rebuilding of the school. All the Asian organizations, Asian student organizations at Sac State, City College, they all sent letters. I think there were some junior high school Asian clubs also sent letters. They were outside the neighborhood, but they, you know, had been in contact with ACS, and so they also sent letters of support. So I think we also broadened out, you know, beyond the immediate areas that were impacted and got support from other organizations, Parkview Presbyterian Church.
And other churches too.
And other
community.
churches, yeah.
Yeah, it was a wide base.
Yeah, I think this was, you know, really for us, when we were looking at what we're trying to do as organizers in the community, you know, building coalitions within the Asian American community and with the larger community, to be able to show that people have the power to take control of what they want and how to go and face the power structure to get what they want. You know, and I think that this was a good example of that kind of community organizing.
Yeah, I want to mention that a lot of the activities that ACS brought to the community was covered by the media, the Sacramento Bee, and also back then it was the Sacramento Union. And there was this one journalist, a reporter by the name of K.W. Lee, who was very active in terms of covering information, news about the Asian community, and ACS was part of that process. And he was quite a character in terms of providing, if you had talked to him, you would understand where he was coming from. He was very adamant for services for the Asian community. Harold, can you lead us in terms of the conversation as to what ACS decided to close its doors?
Yeah, okay, well, I'll first start with our official reasons why, you know, we closed. You know, and, you know, it was like we fulfilled our goal in raising issues and starting programs where the people affected, you know, took responsibility to run them and no longer dependent on the ACS for assistance. You know, issues like the United Crusade and Fantasia, programs like the Yellow House tutorial program, and the community-run garden, and the senior programs. So those were kind of the things that, you know, we kind of like, we wanted to start them, but we also wanted to educate people, and they would take responsibility in running those kinds of programs. And at the time, we were young and idealistic, and we felt we had reached that point, and that was, you know, the reason why we closed.
An opportune moment from my perspective when I looked at it, that because I had been involved in the Japanese Community Center, Peggy Saika, who was also part of ACS, was involved with the Japanese Community Center. There was an overlap with what ACS had been doing with the elderly recreation programs and what Japanese Community Center ultimately wanted to do. While their larger goal of building senior housing and nursing home was not attainable immediately because of the elimination of federal funds, there was the possibility of Japanese Community Center taking over our community service programs, our elderly recreation program, and that fit in with what was part of their larger, program. Was not only the housing, but also to have kind of a community center, have classes, and we had already had part of that built at ACS. So, as an interim step for Japanese Community Center, before until they could build the housing, would be to turn over that part of our program to Japanese Community Center, because you had a much broader base in the Japanese community of people participating in the JCC effort. And I could see where they would have no problems raising funds to support those programs and continue forward. I just remember one of the first programs that JCC did during that transition period was they raised funds by holding a community entertainment cultural show at the Hiram Johnson Auditorium. And they sold that thing out, like no problem. So it was just, they had a very broad base that they could work through. And it seemed like a good jumping off or intersection for us to turn over that part of the program to JCC.
So one of ACS's legacy is caring for our elderly, Japanese and Chinese, together in one Asian American organization. And this was carried forward by both JCC and ACC. And we demonstrated the need for services by starting classes for seniors. We, I think, made huge gains in increasing interpretive services and bilingual staff in a lot of agencies and organizations around town. We started the community garden, which Harold reminds me wasn't a fad back then. But now everybody has one, right, Harold?
Right.
And to me, I mean, the most important was the lasting legacy of rebuilding the schools. So those schools are still there today. And it's a reminder that when people work together, there's a huge amount that can be accomplished. I am amazed when I look back at how much we did in 4 years. Do you guys realize that we did all this in 4 years? I mean, to me, it's, of course, we were students. We, really didn't have real jobs.
Cut class a lot.
Yeah, but we did an amazing amount in 4 years. So ACS was kind of like the catalyst for many, many things to come. And as a result of ACS closing, Randy talked about the transition to JCC and then to ACC. And I think, Raymond, you wanted to comment a little bit about some other programs that started up that had roots at ACS.
Yeah, right, exactly. Thank you. Obviously, the large organization, the overwhelming organization was ACS. Below that was the Asian Referral and Interpreter Service. I think that was one of the ACS programs, that were advocated for and funded by the government for ACC. It was one of their programs. And the other program was also, let's see, we had that, and remind me? Asian Manpower Program. And that was the only other program that I know that was started by ACS. Below that, though, was a bunch of subsidiary organizations that received the impetus because they were both part of ACC at one point, and they branched out further, defining the needs that they had within their separate sectors. So that's where we come up with all these various organizations that were not directly involved with ACC, but had their impetus and had their, the start, the push from ACC, and that would include Asian Job Resources Project, Asian Resources, later on Asian Community Counseling Services, after that Transcultural Wellness Clinics. This shows the breadth of all the kinds of different organizations we were able to put together. I mean, it wasn't just simply this. It was a whole variety of programs that we put together to try to see if we can go ahead and build something and get something together that really met the needs of the people. And they'd be able to tell us, no, that doesn't meet our needs. And they will go in and we'll go back, retune, and we'll go ahead and do all this. We did this, as June said, for 4 years. Well, if we would have went any further, it'd been 4 more years.
So as we close our third episode of the history of ACC, we want to invite you to view a 13-minute video of some of the activities that took place during ACS and see how many people you'd recognize or see yourself perhaps.
Mm-hmm.
Remember, this was 51 years ago, so if you could remember back then, if you were part of that video, or if your grandparents were part of that video.
Oh, Lord.
So in closing, can you tell me your challenges for ACC from your experience with ACS? For me, the transition for elderly program from ACS to JCC, ACC were about the elderly. We talk about caregivers. We talk about adult daycare centers. And we also talk about bilingual services for our patients. And those are the challenges that I see in terms of people that needs care as we grow older. We need to be concerned, and probably through Meals on Wheels that ACC provides, that we could identify those people who might be in social isolation. Because during our pandemic situation, we may be in that position where we need to tune in to those people who might be socially isolated. So those are the challenges, I think, for immediate challenges or near the future for ACC.
Earl, do you have some comments?
Yeah, I think when we were doing the practice session, Ted kind of asked us, hey, what do you see in the future for the next 50 years of, ACC? And I kind of jokingly said, be like Gray Panthers and do more advocacy. And, it's something that ACS did in terms of the advocacy that we did that was kind of lost after we closed, and other people went on and do other things individually, but not as an organization. So, like ACC could form a 401c4, I think, which gives you a political arm to do politics and advocacy, without jeopardizing your nonprofit status. Places like Planned Parenthood, they have a Planned Parenthood advocate, which is a 401c4, I think, which gives them that ability because it's separated from the main parent group. But, he, as an outsider looking into ACC, it's like ACC has a outstanding nursing home, and it should not be the only one in Sacramento. I think that the ACC could actually replicate itself and be a place where the workforce that works in nursing homes get trained in the way that we treat our elderly with dignity and respect. And that's what every nursing home should be doing. But you always kind of read these stories about what happens to the seniors in these elderly centers. And sometimes you feel like, I'm not sending my parents to any of these places because it's so horrible. You see the horror stories. But I think that in a 50 years' time, why can't, you know, a place like ACC not just take care of their own, but be a place where everybody gets trained to treat people like they get treated here in all of the nursing homes in Sacramento. So, you know, that's the challenge that I would put out there in terms of the next 50 years.
Thanks, Harold. I think another important challenge is to engage young people. And I hope that ACC can be creative and inspiring for the next generation to be involved in the community. Because I think that there are many things that need volunteers, certainly, but also advocacy. And at this point, I think it's, you know, with the state of the world, I think it's really important that our young people are involved in the community and understand some of the issues that they're facing and that their children will be facing. So.
Yeah, well, we want to thank the audience, you viewers out there, for joining us. I want to thank June again for coming from Washington, and Raymond and Harold and Randy, and our interviewer that we interviewed, Lilly Shiroi. We want to thank all of you for joining us, and especially Ted Fong,
Right.
behind the scene guy
Yeah.
that brought all his equipment in my participation with Lilly in terms of videotaping the interview, and his wonderful assistants in front of us.
Mm-hmm.
So Ted, we want to thank you for all your services you're doing.
So we're going to show the video again, right, that we showed at the beginning. And we want to thank everybody for joining. Stay tuned if you want to watch the video again.